The family was thrown into disarray when the mother vanished without a trace. Her abrupt disappearance left the father to fend for the family alone, with no clue as to her whereabouts. It wasn't until 23 years later, during a holiday trip, that the husband stumbled upon a startling revelation about the missing mother. The family's long-standing mystery about their mother's disappearance was finally solved 23 years later, just as the youngest child left for college. With all his children now in college, Henry decided to take a much-needed holiday, a respite he hadn't allowed himself in the 2 decades since his wife vanished, leaving him to raise their 5 children alone. The absence of his wife, Lucy, had always weighed heavily on him, filled with the daily burden of unanswered questions. Now, as he prepared for his trip, a glance at an old photo of Lucy reignited his longing and the haunting question. "Will I ever see you again?" he quietly pondered. Ever since Lucy vanished, Henry found it impossible to consider being with anyone else. She was his one and only. The memory of that December day when he lost his soulmate was etched in his mind as if it happened yesterday. The silence of her absence contrasted sharply with the laughter of their oblivious children. Snapped back to reality by the taxi's horn, Henry gathered his belongings, ready for the vacation he had long postponed, murmuring about the rest he was about to finally enjoy. His destination was Lake Como in Italy, a place deeply cherished for the annual visits shared with Lucy, now revisited after 23 years without her. On the flight, Henry was haunted by thoughts of Lucy and the chilling day she disappeared. His instinct had immediately told him something was amiss, leading to a desperate call to the police, who, after 3 days, ceased their search, a moment Henry could never forget. Gazing down at Lake Como from the plane's window, the sight of the high mountains cradling the crystal blue waters stirred a deep nostalgia for the joyful times once shared there, now shadowed by a significant absence. Stepping onto Italian ground, the sun's warmth and the crisp mountain air felt like a bittersweet welcome. The magical landscape overwhelmed him with nostalgia, and he questioned his decision to return. The flood of memories brought a deep sadness, realizing the tradition once shared with his wife was now a solitary journey. Unbeknownst to him, this trip was about to unveil unexpected changes to his life, altering his path in unimaginable ways. The taxi made its way through the narrow roads that led to Lake Como. "Wow," mumbled Henry. It was like nothing had changed over the last 23 years. Little towns were dotted along the shoreline, each more charming than the previous, and the air filled with the recognizable scent. Did he remember all these years? The scent lingered in his memory. Was he able to recognize something like that after all this time? Henry shrugged as he watched the buildings disappear in the distance. Not much later, the taxi stopped and they arrived at his location. Henry shook off his thoughts and stepped out of the taxi, ready for some relaxation. He paid and thanked the driver before entering the charming lake house. Unsure of what to do without Lucy's usual planning, he decided to explore nearby areas, unaware of the significance of this decision. As he prepared for bed, Henry glanced at a map. His cottage was secluded, but the large city of Verona was close by. Verona, he read aloud, choosing it as his first vacation activity, curious if he had ever visited before. Arriving in Verona, memories of strolling with Lucy as young parents overwhelmed him. Lost in thought, he wandered down a narrow alley towards the city center. Suddenly, a familiar scent stopped Henry in his tracks, filling him with fear. It was the same smell he had noticed in the taxi. Was it a mistake, or did he truly recognize it? He felt entranced, trying to pinpoint the distinct aroma. Desperate to find its source, he lifted his nose to the wind and inhaled deeply, searching for the elusive scent. He moved around frantically, trying to locate the source. He needed to know what it was, and then his nose led him to a small neighborhood, where he saw several open windows. "Aha!" he exclaimed happily. When he got closer, it became apparent that the smell came from one of them. But which one? He got right under them, and suddenly he realized it. He knew what the scent was. No, it couldn't be. He shook his head furiously. The thought that went through his head was impossible. It just couldn't be true. Like this scent smelled exactly like Lucy's apple pie. The memory brought tears to his eyes, but also a slight smile. What a coincidence this was. But was it really? As quickly as the smile appeared, disappeared again. Henry was struck by a sudden realization. Lucy's apple pie had a distinct scent thanks to special herbs from a specific shop in Mexico, a family recipe passed down for generations. The unique sweet and herbal aroma was unmistakable. This revelation made him question the coincidence he initially dismissed. The vacation was meant for relaxation, but the familiar scent of the pie left Henry tense and restless. Driven by an urge to uncover the truth, he found himself knocking on a door, surprised by his own impulsiveness. As he heard movement inside, he braced himself for answers, unaware that his life was on the brink of a significant change. The door opened to reveal a young woman, not the Lucy he had secretly hoped for. The scent of apple pie intensified as the door swung open, momentarily distracting him until a small voice snapped him back to reality. "Can I help you?" the young lady asked. Henry was so deep into his thoughts that she startled him, even though he was the one who had knocked on her door in the first place. He stared at her for a while, not knowing what to say. Then he decided to just come clean. "Hey." Henry explained that he was enjoying the city and had wandered into the neighborhood when he suddenly smelled something amazing. "Your pie," he said with a smile as he pointed at it. Then he asked her how it was made, if she used a recipe, and the answer would shock him. "I learned how to make it from the woman by the lake," a young lady replied cheerfully, pleased that Henry was drawn to the scent of her pie. However, Henry was taken aback by her answer. How could someone here know Lucy's family recipe, a secret kept within her family, especially since Lucy was an only child and had never shared it with him or their children? "Lady by the lake," Henry echoed softly, puzzled. He was certain he had heard correctly, but he also knew the recipe was exclusive to Lucy's family. Had Lucy shared it with someone here? He needed answers, but when he inquired about the identity and whereabouts of the lady by the lake, the young lady hesitated, clearly uneasy about divulging information to a stranger. Understanding her reluctance, Henry thought of a way to gain her trust without realizing the shocking revelation that awaited him. He decided to share his story, hoping it would encourage her to open up about the woman by the lake. But as he began his tale, the young lady interrupted him. "How do you know her name is Lucy?" The question hung in the air, leaving both of them stunned. Flabbergasted, Henry managed to respond, "What do you mean?" She repeated her question, asking how he knew the lady's name was Lucy. In that moment, everything clicked in Henry's mind. The lady at the lake was named Lucy, and she knew how to make Lucy's pie. Henry couldn't believe what he was hearing. The young lady saw his confused and surprised look, and he immediately started to tell his story. Henry noticed the story had the effect he hoped it would have. Before he finished the story, the young lady took off her apron and told him she would take him to Lake Como. She wasn't going to be the person to spoil this potential meeting. Thank you very much," Henry exclaimed. Then he thought of something. Why would Lucy be here all this time? He followed the young lady to the shore of the lake. The thought echoed through his mind. Why would she be here? Why didn't she come in contact with him? A small cabin by the water came into sight, and the lady indicated. There she lives. With a mix of determination and growing tension, Henry approached the cabin, each step intensifying his disbelief. He pinched himself to confirm reality, pondering the potential reunion with Lucy and the questions he might ask her. Through a window, he noticed a figure moving behind a curtain. Suddenly, the curtain shifted and a woman's face appeared, locking eyes with Henry. In that instant, the woman quickly closed the curtains, leaving Henry frozen in shock. Despite longing for this moment for 23 years, he realized he was unprepared. It was Lucy. Overwhelmed and rooted to the spot, he finally found his voice and called out her name, Lucy. They stared at each other, both unsure what to do. Then Henry took action. He quickly walked toward the door, broke down in tears while waiting for her to open the door. He was no longer in control of his emotions. He was about to reunite with his long-lost love, the mother of his children. Henry heard the lock of the door slowly turn. He was crying. Lucy pulled the door open. Henry flew right into her arms. The embrace lasted almost 5 minutes. Lucy asked him if he wanted to sit down. They were speechless as they slowly moved onto the sofas and pillows. Henry sat down, but Lucy couldn't sit still and acted nervous. Then she got up. Henry took a seat on the couch and looked around. He saw a lot of pictures of a guy in his 20s. When Lucy came back, she looked at Henry with a scared look on her face. That's when Henry asked her the questions that had haunted his mind for 23 years. What happened? Henry watched as Lucy's face drained of color, her fear palpable. She opened her mouth but was momentarily overcome by emotion before she could speak. "I made a terrible mistake," she finally said. Henry, looking concerned, urged her not to worry and just explain. Taking a deep breath, Lucy recounted meeting someone during their last vacation on the night Henry was ill in the cabin. Upon returning home, she discovered she was pregnant. Unwilling to raise a child out of wedlock, she went back to Lake Como to be with the child's father. Now, with her son living in Milan with his father, Lucy was left alone. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. Henry, though furious, was also relieved that the worst scenarios he had imagined were not true. "Come home, darling," Henry suggested. "Then we will see how we will approach it further, please." Lucy was astonished by Henry's reaction after all that had happened. They embraced, and Henry stayed with Lucy for a few days before they both returned home. 6 months after their reunion at Lake Como, they were living together again in their old home. The children had mixed reactions to their mother's return. Some didn't remember her at all, while others found it difficult to adjust. However, over time, the family began to heal. Lucy shared everything with Henry, and they started anew. Eventually, everything went back to how it was before her disappearance, and the family was whole and happy once again.